Good afternoon. Welcome to this book launch hosted by Friends of Europe. My name is Laszlo Andor. I'm going to be the moderator of this discussion. And let me tell you the agenda of the program. The event is organized in order to present the latest book by the founder of Friends of Europe, who is standing next to me. Charles Merritt doesn't need an introduction for the Friends of Europe, and the title of his latest book is People Power: Why We Need More Migrants. And as you can see from the title, this discussion is not organized to beat around the bush. We are going to be very, very clear and straightforward about the analysis and also about the conclusions. And in order to reinforce this approach, we invited a keynote speaker, who is Dalia Grybauskaite, former president of Lithuania and also a former member of the European Commission. After the interventions of the author and Dalia Grybauskaite, there will be an opportunity to go into an interactive session and ask questions from the floor. So first of all, I would like to invite the author. Just congratulations to the book. I had the opportunity already to read certain parts. Why don't you use the next 5 minutes to explain our audience what's the purpose of the book and what the key ideas inside?
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Laszlo. The purpose of the book is to ring an alarm bell and to try and wake people up to the need in Britain, in Europe for more people. It's very simple. Europe is shrinking and getting old. I don't claim in the book to have a magic wand for the problems, the many problems surrounding migration. But I do believe it's a problem we have to solve. It's become a toxic political issue, but that doesn't mean we can allow ourselves to just ignore it. There's no real choice. My book, really, I started talking to people who know about the different facets of migration from a very different angle. I really started talking to people about Europe's aging. And the statistics, the forecasts are terrifying. We don't have any choice but to have more Europeans to replace the many retiring people of my generation who are, instead of being taxpayers, are becoming tax users. So one of the first things I did was to look at how many people in the workforce in Europe support how many pensioners. Well, for a long time, there were 4 workers paying taxes to pay the costs, pensions, and healthcare and so on of pensioners. 4 to 1. Worked very well. The latest figures from the European Commission are that we're now down to 2.9 to 1. And that's taken place in the space of about 4 or 5 years. Eventually, says the Commission, backed up by the IMF, we will be down to 1.7 taxpayers per pensioner. It's obviously unsustainable. What are we going to do about it? Well, the answer that people come up with, I'm afraid they're not convincing. First of all, people say, well, we must be more fertile, have more babies. It's not too late. The trouble is, fertility is now sunk to 1.5 children per couple. So trying to reverse the fertility rates is something that governments have tried from Russia to Portugal, and they haven't made a dent in it. The second one is automation. Everybody says, oh, well, if we don't have enough workers, automation will fix it. But I'm afraid it won't. So far it hasn't. Computerization, globalization hasn't helped us. And of course there is the additional problem. Robots don't pay taxes. So until we can fix those problems, we're back to people. 10 years ago, when people started worrying in Europe about this problem, they asked former Spanish Prime Minister Felipe González, one of my political heroes, I have to say, to look into it. He came back with a wise man's report that by mid-century, Europe needed 100 million immigrants. His report was quietly buried. It was just too toxic and embarrassing for European governments to want to talk about it. Now, I'd be the last to deny that there are problems associated with immigration, and we all know what they are. And some of them are practical, language, education, and so on, and others are cultural, if you like, religion, race, and so on. But these are problems we have to fix. We can't just ignore them and allow them to become more and more toxic. We have to explain to Europe's voters why we need to bring people in. And we have to stop the hypocrisy of European governments saying, oh, we need more legal migration, and then having halved the number of work visas and legal migrants they've taken in over the last 10, 15 years or so. So I think I'm going to close with saying one thing. We can do nothing. We can keep telling ourselves we're saving the European culture. Fine. But what we're doing is we're condemning our children and grandchildren to really low living standards, because as the workforce shrinks, our ability to maintain an open-minded and relaxed and progressive society shrink accordingly. So I worry very much what Europe will look like long after I'm dead.
Thank you very much, Giles. Obviously, in 5 minutes, you cannot say everything about a book, but indeed, we understand the orientation of your analysis and also some of the key messages. And now I would like to invite Dalia Grybauskaite, who is joining us online. Thank you so much, Madam President, for taking the time. Do you agree with Giles? Does Europe need more migrants?
Europe needs more labor. In any way we can receive it or grow our own or import. And migration, one of the methods how we can increase our labor market and our future population. But because of this objective necessity is very much related with the spoiled or abuse of this necessity by the criminal smugglers, by the illegal migrants, not refugees, not legal migration, but illegal crossings. And of course, this all also leads us to recent examples of weaponization of the migrants on our borders, and especially now on east borders. It was in 2015, 2016 done by Russia on Finnish and Norwegian border. Now it is done by Russia and Belarus on the Baltic states and Polish border. So all this damaging the attitude towards the increase of our population purely by increasing the migration and willingness of population, the political acceptance, the growth of negative populism. So all this is some kind of reflection a reality on the ground. And this is very much spoils the objective scientific research and attitude towards the increase of our labor market by the imported or invitation of legal and regulated migration. And why the joint European policies need to approach these kind of problematics, especially when we're talking about regular immigration. This can be solved on state-by-state basis, and there is no need any additional European approach. But then we are calling and talking about illegal or unregulated migration. We are facing a lot of challenges because Europe is still do not have very detailed regulated Schengen border code, where in details description is how to manage our external borders, because today we can do only surveillance and detection, nothing else, and there is no any instruments in our toolbox for prevention or combat illegal crossings and illegal immigration. So all these questions are spoiling the main message and the main understanding, objective understanding, that we need additional people in our societies, we need additional labor in our market, but absorption capacity, willingness of population to accept, political system to accept this still is sensitive, and in each country very much different. And this is the topic which needs to be already taken care by on European level, not left only on national level. And this what is very difficult to agree upon because of sensitivity, but objective necessity of importing the people or importing the labor, especially integrating the legal immigrants into our societies is absolutely clear. But how to manage it on the field concretely, how to make it possible, having and seeing such kind of resistance on the ground. Of course, it's a goal of ruling politicians in each country, but also on the level of European policies already. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to use my privilege as a moderator to ask a question from both speakers. Just, the book starts with a chapter about myths around migration, because a lot of people have strong opinions about migration, but a lot of phenomena are also misunderstood. May I ask, what is your favorite myth?
My favorite myth, the one that makes me angriest of all.
Okay.
My favorite myth is the one that immigrants come to sponge of European social benefits and taxes. The reality, and an enormous body of work has been done by economic researchers. Immigrants contribute more to our tax income than they take out, far more. And in fact, immigrants around the world seem to be outperforming natives as contributors to the economy and to society. So that's the myth that I dislike most of all.
Okay, thanks very much for highlighting.
And at one point I'd like to come back on what we've heard from Dalia.
Maybe I ask a question first from Madam President, and then you can respond to each other. Madam President, I would like to highlight something which Charles originally mentioned in his introduction, which is the effect of aging on the balance between the active and the inactive population. And in my view, Lithuania is a country where some of these consequences also connect with the question of internal migration in the European Union. Since many people, especially young people, have left the country, probably one of the highest share inside the European Union, which certainly affects on this balance between the active and inactive, including on social security, for example. How do you see the impact of intra-EU mobility on these questions of sustainability of the social security in these cases?
In our case, of course, we lost a lot of our population to the other European countries, but by the same time, we received a lot of migration from neighboring countries, as Ukraine, for example, Belarus, even Russia. So somehow a little bit it is balanced. But anyway, we lost quite a lot during these 16 years of our membership in the European Union. But in recent 2 years, especially before pandemic, we started to see the tendency of returning back of our people home. We'll see how it will go after the crisis will be gone. Yes, internal differences between the standard of living was so high and so different, and comparatively in Lithuania low. We started 51% of GDP, then we became members of the European Union. Now we are 78. So in 16 years, we reached and we've grown very fast. So everything is changing. A lot of things are changing. Now we are desired country to come in. Previously, it was opposite. We'll see how it will go. But we lost some blood, yes, and we need additional also, yes. But this is, as objective factor, do not very much influences the decisions of governing politicians.
Thank you very much. So the circular migration is not entirely a myth, right? So you have to be patient, but it starts happening. You wanted to ask a question?
Well, very much. I mean, first of all, Dalia, I was delighted when Friends of Europe suggested that they invite you, because not only because of the time you were in Brussels and your sort of track record as president of Lithuania, but also a more uncomfortable fact. Your country is said to be the fastest shrinking country in the world. Lithuania has lost 25% of its population in the last 25 to 30 years. So it's true, you have started to bring in more immigrants from mainly neighboring countries. But I was struck when you said more workers, more labor. And I wondered, did that mean citizens, or are you expecting people to come and then leave because they're not white Europeans, if they're not white Europeans? So my last question is, if you are going to open the gates of Lithuania, how narrow an opening do you plan to do, given the degree to which Lithuania has been shrinking?
Really, it's nothing with the color. It's more with the capacity to integrate into the labor market and necessary qualifications. Yes, we do have phenomena that, for example, Ukrainians are coming, working here some time and then leaving for Germany because the social benefits and salaries are still larger in some other European countries. So we still are transiting territory because of the level of standard of living and social payments. We do not support housing as it is done in Germany, for example. So we not yet became a pulling factor still for migration, and this is still the case. But as I said, mainly we do have labor from neighboring countries, from the third countries, from outside the European Union. And the rest, everything will be managed by time, I think, slowly, but by time. The population also need to prepare for accepting the different cultures, different religions, and this takes time.
Indeed. I was inspired by a number you mentioned in the introduction, quoting Felipe Gonzalez, who apparently, before yourself, also said that Europe needs migrants, and a number, 100 million, was mentioned at the time. And I think Spain is a very interesting case because they did, before the Great Recession, their fair share in terms of receiving large numbers of migrants from different continents. And I think it's important to highlight Spain also because of the degree of tolerance. Somehow, as opposed to various other countries, and maybe I shouldn't start a list now, the environment, the public sentiment has probably been much more welcoming. Do you look into this question of being welcoming or controversial in the book?
Not so much in the book, because Spain is rather a special case. It's opened its gates very wide, but most of the immigrants were from Latin America, and they spoke Spanish, and they were quite easy to integrate, much easier than is the case for most of the rest of Europe, with people coming from countries where they don't speak any of the European languages. So I think Spain is a special case, but I also think you're right to say the Spanish were more open-minded about immigration than some of the other European countries we could mention, even its northern neighbor, France.
Okay, and maybe one point from the intervention of Dalia Grybauskaite, who indeed highlighted the recent trend, which is called very often the weaponization of migration. Before we open up to the interactive session, I really want to hear a little bit about your expectation. Is this something which, so to speak, could be solved through diplomacy or otherwise? Or we have to expect a long period when we somehow live together with this phenomenon, which is called the weaponization of migration by certain countries?
Yeah, I think that it will not go so easily, because the wave of weaponization was directly related with European and American and NATO sanction process that was after the Crimea occupation, the first wave, which was organized by Russia as a retaliation, and it was directly confirmed. I am giving this from my experience in talking with Madame Merkel. She was said by Putin directly that it is the price. And the same we saw after elections of Lukashenko, which in most our countries, NATO and European Union, we not accepted this as legal ruler of the country. We received a lot of immediate responses, and one of the responses was the same methodic, the same organization as it was in 2015-16. It was done in 2020 and 21, and even now still going on the eastern border. And I think with such unfriendly or dictator-oriented or authoritarian regimes, it usually will be one of the tools in their toolbox, which they will use periodically, depending on how much we will be pressing them, or based on our values, on human rights policies. That will be natural reaction of theirs, because they saw that it is easy to organize. They are doing this not only alone, they're doing this with criminal elements, with smugglers, and this quite damaging was before, and it is damaging now. And I think that we will be facing periodically these kind of attempts in different places of the world.
Thank you very much. Now I think we can start questions from the floor, and the first question will come from Anne Battle. I think my colleagues can turn on the camera of Anne.
So thank you very much for allowing me to ask a question. My name is Anne Kehr-Bartel. I'm based in Germany. I'm a social entrepreneur and founder of Radio School of Digital Integration. We are a tech school last year teaching more than 3,300 migrants and refugees tech skills to get them faster into the job market. I think there's absolutely no doubt that we need a new narrative when speaking about migrants and foreigners in Europe. But my question is really about the incentives for organizations like my own. We have seen that the German bureaucracy and also the Danish bureaucracy is extremely high. It's very difficult to make impact bonds or impact contracts with the municipalities. We know that if we put our students into jobs faster than the municipalities are able to do, we can save a lot of money, but evidence don't really seem to be working as a way to make contracts with the municipalities. So my question is, what kind of incentives can we create to see more effective integration in Europe?
Thank you for being concise. Giles?
To begin with, I agree with you 100%. We have to bring people, especially into new high-tech areas of services like yours. I think the problem begins right at the top, not the municipalities, not the bureaucrats, but senior politicians who don't send the signal that we need a new narrative. We need a new mindset. We need to be able to, first of all, do better on education and training of newcomers. And secondly, we need to make a bonfire of all the silly red tape. For instance, in some European countries, it's very difficult for a migrant to open a bank account. If you can't open a bank account, you are a non-person. You can't rent an apartment, you can't apply for a job, you can't even apply for the social security that you might want to sponge off. So I really think that the problem begins at the top. And it's not a question of detail, it's a question of attitude and political signals. And here I think we need to see much more political courage from Brussels, from the European Commission. And I don't want to take too long answering this, but I would briefly like to point to the fact that in a few weeks' time, the Commission is meant to produce its new Pact on Migration and Asylum Policies. It had been expected to be a hard-hitting review and a much more pan-European approach. But everything I hear from the bureaucrats working on it is that it's being diluted, sliced into different bits, and we're not getting the signals from Brussels that might wake up some of the member states' capitals and their governments.
Thank you very much. Next question from Laura Sullivan.
Thank you very much. I'm from We Move Europe, which is a campaigning organization connecting with about 1 million Europeans every week around issues related to social, environmental justice and democracy. I think one of my favorite myths to build on what has just been said by Giles, beyond the sponges, is either that migrants are stealing our jobs or that they're lazy, but we can't really decide which it is. So the alarm bell is very welcome and very timely, and it seems a little bit as though there are other issues as well, such as the breaches of international asylum law by Greece 2 years ago and by Poland in terms of taking away rights of people on the move. There's also a reality check on the long-term perspective of climate change, and many of us may be on the move for before too long. Are these the rules we'd like to have applied to us? But perhaps most of all, and relating to the question now, is the credibility of the very European project that is values-based. And if it is, it feels like a lot of those values are very fake, because every time we talk about solidarity, it is solidarity for countries inside Europe, which is fine. But what about the solidarity for people on the move? So it feels as though our language has shifted a lot since 2013, away from humans and towards illegal flows, from groups of people to swarms of migrants and so on. And the politics, therefore, has moved with that. So my question is, how do we get, and this relates to what Giles has just said about the problem perhaps beginning at the top and the political courage that is needed, how do we get the European Commission and other leaders that can be reasoned with to get back to humanity? It is a source of concern for us that Ursula von der Leyen and Charles Michel landed in Greece, but never spoke to any of the people on the move and referred to Greece as a shield for Europe, even though Greece was firing basically smoke bombs at people on the move. So what do we say to that?
Thank you very much. Understood. I think both of you could respond to this question. Maybe starting with Dalia Grybauskaite.
So it's a very sensitive question to the politicians in power, because they need to manage their also not only willingness, political willingness and willingness of population, general population, but also absorption capacity. What means that financial capacity to absorb the huge inflows. And solidarity is fine, but we need to pay large amounts of money, and not all countries agrees to do this. Why European approach generally, even now on the Migration Pact, will be very difficult and will be very generalized without concrete toolbox, probably, I guess. And answering a little bit to Anne's question in the very beginning about incentives, I'm sure that this will be not in this agreement, and incentives will be left to decide for each member state case by case. And as much as politicians in these countries will be willing to do this, and financial resources are available for them. So I'm sure that on incentives, there will be no general European approach, especially having in mind that most policies are agreed on unanimity. So you can imagine that it is very difficult why most of the documents are becoming very vague and very general in their wording and not very concrete to be able to be agreed. So, but a lot of things I want to just emphasize, it depends on political willingness of each country and its political elite and its people. And in Anne's also question to saying, and even in Laura's question in general about humanization of our policies, it's again, depends very much on the pressure for political elites, for governments, from the population, from the NGOs, from lobbying on this issue, is the same as with climate change. Humanization in our policies is probably the same. Everybody speaks about it, everybody understands, but nobody wants to pay for it. So that's where the NGOs and general population can be very influential in voicing their opinions on these kind of issues. Because politicians usually reflect what the public thinks, and they need to follow what public thinks, because they are elected by public. And this is the best tool you have in your hands, your own hands.
Thank you. Would you like that?
Yes, please. The question seemed to be based on morality. Should we Europeans be ashamed of the way that we are really blocking the way for people who are suffering hunger, climate change, political pressures, and so on? Yes, of course we should. But I would like to say, I think there are very strong realpolitik reasons why the European Commission should be doing much more than it is. When I first came to Brussels, I was a journalist, and I used to talk about the Commission as being the world's biggest think tank. And the reason I did that was that I was very struck that the Commission, as part of its culture, used to think well ahead, used to try and think, where are we going to be in 10, 15, 25 years? I think nowadays its focus is much more immediate. But we have to look 25, 30 years ahead. And the realpolitik problem is this. The new member states, especially the Visegrad states, that are most opposed to migration, are also the economically most vulnerable to demographic change. They're going to be poorer sooner than anybody else. And that's going to call into question a whole lot of sensitive issues. We've already been arguing about debt mutualization. That's just the beginning of it. We're going to be talking about the solidarity of the European Union, what Western Europe will do for Eastern Europe when things get nasty. And at that point, we may be looking at the crumbling and even the collapse of the European Union.
We come back to the Visegrad question a little bit later. Next question from Michelle Pace.
Thank you very much. And Giles, I want to congratulate you because this book is not only a very timely one, but it's very well written in terms of accessible language. So thank you for that. My question relates precisely to your point that you just said, that most politicians, and I'm based in Denmark, most politicians are extremely short-sighted, not least our European leaders. So one of the ways in which you give some concrete suggestions in ways that we can address the root causes of what actually makes people on the move try to seek better lives in Europe is that you suggest an ambitious EU strategy that is designed to pour in economic development and investment spending into Africa and Arab countries. And you say that one of the places that we can start is with a revamp of the European neighborhood policy, which of course we agree needs radical overhaul. I would like you to elaborate on this because this is something that has been on the table for a number of years now. And maybe Dalia could also come in as to how we can make our politicians and maybe also the public, I think it's also important, see the light by way of how this can actually benefit Europe as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I suppose a Danish translation of the book is highly recommended.
Not
Go ahead.
necessary.
Yes.
Danes are so good in English. The anecdote that sticks in my mind is a Moroccan economics minister who said to one of the members of the European Commission 3 or 4 years ago, I think, the Moroccan minister said, look, your choice is very simple. Either you buy our tomatoes or you let our people pick your tomatoes. And I think that sums up the choice for how we treat our southern neighbours. And our southern neighbours go all the way down to Cape Town and right across to Iran, Afghanistan. I think we really need not only to have a new narrative and a rethink of migration, but we also need to have a really good overhaul of development policy, because our development policy has been grudging, inadequate, and in many ways unquestionable for a long time. And I think it's high time we opened up the whole question of what we're going to do for Africa and the Arab world. And I had thought the Arab Spring was going to open that question, and we missed that opportunity. And it's time we recreated a new one.
Dalia, would you like to add something?
Yes, on neighborhood policy, I was more involved, of course, with the Eastern neighborhood policy with 6 countries, which now one dropped at all. It was also Belarus. And it was very clear that with neighborhood policy, we had more political relations than real economic ones, while we were talking more about development assistance and less political cooperation. And this symbolism occurred that it was not helpful enough, neither for political system or for democratic institution building, neither for economic survival. And this also made a lot of impetus towards migration from these neighborhood regions towards the European Union. So it is very clear that we need to invest more and seriously into economic development, into, of course, democratic building of these societies as much as it is possible, of course, not by enforcing, not by force. I don't support the policies to export democracy to other countries. They need to accept this system by themselves. But economic development, economic assistance need to be more serious if we would like to create around the European Union in the south and on the east border the security, economic and political security zones.
Thank you. Next question from Stefano Manservisi.
Thank you very much, Laszlo, and thank you, Giles, for this very courageous book, which is telling plain truth, which, by the way, are also known, but have been rarely put that in this way, very clear and very. Now, the term of the difficulties are well known, which are blocking politics, and you know, we are sort of chicken and egg, situation in which we say, yes, we would need more, but until the moment when we are not able to demonstrate to our people that border are better managed, then we don't move. And even a very modest package, although quite ambitious, of the Commission to try and take this as a package is not only blocked, but even downplayed in the interinstitutional discussions. Now, if politics is blocked now, I think maybe it's time for the private sector to take some initiatives, because the paradox is that after and through the recovery, we are shaping a more integrated, economically speaking, Europe. We have a more integrated economic policy in common, and we are preparing ourselves for the digital revolution. This requires an equipped labor market today and tomorrow, and to be prepared. Now, it should be time to revise what is the division of labor between member states and the union in terms of migration policy, intending this as quotas and numbers, how many people are entitled to come, not into France or Belgium or Italy, but into this integrated and more integrated Europe. So therefore, my question is that possible or conceivable to have an initiative from the private sector saying, look, for the next 5 years or 10 years, we altogether need, I don't know how many million workers, and therefore we call on the European member states to have one let's say one quota, which then we can distribute according to our needs. So in other terms, to set in motion something which is pushed heavily by the private sector, because obviously we have to care about those which are willing to come and which are badly treated. But from another point of view, I'm very worried and concerned by the incapacity of the union to fulfill its plan of growth without this labor force. So therefore, private sector role in addressing this challenge. Thanks.
Thank you. Private sector.
I'm delighted to hear this from Stefano Manservisi, because, Stefano, when you were Director General in various directorates of the Commission, I know how hard you've thought for trying to make the institution and politicians around Europe look differently. And you're quite right about the private sector. And they've somehow been sort of pushed out of the discussion. The answer I personally would propose is simple. It's tax. You give companies tax breaks for bringing in and training people. It's much easier than trying to set up elaborate new educational and training establishments in different member states. It's much more efficient and it's more likely to work. So I think tax is the key to bringing in more people. Tax is the key to engaging the private sector. And tax, or the absence of tax, is going to be the key to our problem as it gets worse.
Thank you. Dalia, anything to add on private sector? Then we can move on to Robert Cox.
Very shortly, that the same as public organizations, NGOs, the private sector businesses are very important actors in the society, and they are listened. by the politicians. So the most welcome if businesses and private sector, small, medium, and large one, will be able to express very, very seriously their concerns and declare very clearly proposals. So for politicians, it's the very serious point of reference.
Thank you very much. Apologies, Dalia. Next question from Robert Cox. If he has the microphone unmuted. If not, then we come back perhaps later. There is a question from the Debating Europe platform. Who would like to present this?
Yes, here, thank you. I must say Debating Europe is Friends of Europe's citizen engagement online platform. And with a 5 million strong community, Debating Europe encourages a genuine conversation between Europe's citizens and its policymakers. So we have gathered a few questions, but in the interest of time, I will only be introducing one. This is a comment from Josh. Josh says, I'm an immigrant in Europe. I hold an Australian passport. I even overstayed on my visa for 6 months by accident. I turned up to the police station to renew it. Nobody cared. I fell on hard times around then too. We had to accept welfare to stay in our house. Nobody came and said I was just some lazy immigrant for doing so. Nobody even built a wall to keep me out. This is because I'm white, middle class, and speak English. The issue here isn't that immigrants are a problem. It's the wrong sort of immigrants who maybe have a different skin color. So then the question is, how much is the immigration debate being driven by racism?
Yes.
I think the last one was a rhetorical question, because we all know that racism is a big problem. If you ask any of the right-wing populist parties, whether it's the Rassemblement National in France or AfD in Germany, what motivates their anti-migrant policy proposals, well, they'll tell you it's race, and they won't be ashamed about it. So race is a major problem. But I think it's much more complicated than, if you like, black and white. The problem is, how do we integrate young people from Africa and the Arab world who don't speak our languages very well, who are of a different religion, find it difficult to be accepted by European society. So what do we do about that? I have one suggestion that I think is very overlooked and very important. We have what is known as the women problem in migration. It is there quite simply are not enough girls for all the young men who make the hazardous journey to Europe, legally or illegally. If we're going to raise the birth rates, if we're going to quell criminality, more women are the answer. And that's why it was a great mistake when European national governments started to crack down on family reunifications. The argument was, oh, there's no reason for Granny to come too. In fact, there was every reason for Granny to come too, because she'd bring her daughters and what have you, and she'd also do the babysitting while the wife and daughters were out at work. So I think we have to stop being short-sighted as well as being more open-minded.
Thank you. Dalia, anything to add on either racism or?
Yes, I can say that it is some kind of black cat in the black room. We know that it exists, but we try not to see it. or just to neglect it. But yes, we do see the prejudices against racism, against the race, especially religion, at least in our regions, on the east part of our European Union. And this is a very useful tool for creating myths and fake news about the migrants. And this is still impacts very highly in the opinions and willingness of local population to accept any immigrants from not close countries, but more far countries. So it is the case, and we need to accept it not as a fact, not as a necessity or a good thing, but we cannot hide it. And this is below to our face, really.
Indeed, indeed. Next question from Christelle Gaillard.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you for your contributions to both speakers, and thank you as well for your comments. I have a comment that maybe goes along Debating Europe, the Debating Europe comment that was brought in earlier that I'd like to put to the speakers, because Madam President spoke about how citizens and NGOs need to pave the way in voicing their opinions and their values, and politicians will follow. But I would like to point out that the economic argument can't be explored independently from the analysis of the rhetorics that the political leaders have been having increasingly in the past decade. The language that is used, that is dehumanizing and violent, that is self-serving, especially in the elections that we're seeing in several countries, fans the flames of otherism, xenophobia, and racism. And that needs to be addressed. The responsibility doesn't lie solely with the society, but also with the political class. And I wanted to know if either of you wanted to comment on that. And I have a final comment, which was something that Giles mentioned: how do we integrate African and Arab people who come, who don't often speak the language, who have different religion, which is a bit ironic. As myself, I live in Brussels, and I see so many people around me who speak neither French nor Dutch, and who thrive in the bubble of Brussels around me, and the European bubble. So that's just a bit ironic for me.
Touché.
Usually we say, and I think that politicians are responsible. If they're in power, elected, they're responsible for everything they do, and especially what they say. And the higher position of politician is, the more responsibility he takes for each word. It is publicly done. But we do see a huge shift in recent few years with a fake reality and bubbles we sometimes live in, and with the internet allowing to make a lot of fake theories, myths, and accusations against anybody, hiding behind the not showing your face, your name, and so on. And this made influence into political practices in our countries, where we do see rising populism. Populism, I mean unresponsible behavior, unresponsible language. And they don't care, because they do have a huge amount of supporters, and because of this language, they are elected to the political parliaments, systems, and so on. And that's a problem in our societies, where we started to live in parallel dimensions. One is, as we think, real life, then fake life, then cloud life, and Facebook bubbles, whatever you can name. Yes, it is irresponsible, but some of our populists in political elite in our countries, they are indulging this. They're happy to do this because it is useful for them, and they are elected because of that. And that's a reality we all face again. And how to say, the good politician, responsible politician, usually if he confronts this populism, he's he's attacked by a huge group of people, and especially if it is a woman, I will say, it is becoming very, very hard to battle it, especially on internet. So the political reality is changing. The political tools of behavior of politicians is changing. And more we do see possibilities for unresponsible political behavior because of different tools, political tools of making politics is now introduced into our societies. And this makes easier sometimes for the unresponsible politicians to behave unresponsibly.
Thank you very much. We are coming very close to the end of the time which is available, but if it's very short, I would like to give a last opportunity to Guy Goris to ask a question briefly, if possible.
I will be very brief. Thank you very much. Thanks, Giles, for the book, and I look forward to read it. I very much agree with the point being made that we need a new narrative. My problem is that the new narrative is already there. It's circulating and it's anti-immigration. It's the great replacement narrative. And my question is, do you think, honestly, that with the more instrumental approach that you take by pointing out how much we need migrants to survive and to keep our standards high, will that instrumental approach suffice to answer the great replacement fears that are being stoked across Europe and across the world?
I think the problem is that we're not offering incentives to European employers, European opinion, to bring people in. And it puts me in mind, in fact, of the current situation around Ukraine with Russia. Threatening the Russians is not helpful. With sanctions, offering Russians incentives to cooperate would be much more effective. And I think the same goes for immigration. We must make it worth people's while to think positively about bringing newcomers in. But I would finish by saying this. Immigration isn't going to fix Europe's problems immediately, but it is urgent that we start a long-term strategic approach now, and strategic shouldn't be shorthand for later. I also think, going back to weaponization very briefly, we made our own Achilles heel for Lukashenko to kick, because there is so much disagreement between the member states. Immigration is an obvious way to get disarray of a high purpose inside Europe, and we're about to come up to a renewal of our deal with Turkey, and we've been consistently unpleasant to Mr. Erdogan. He's been unpleasant to us too, but even so, Mr. Erdogan he's going to have us really by the short and curly hairs when we come up to look at the immigration deal we have with him. So I suppose my final thought is the refrain amongst the member states is we must be free to operate our own policies. Well, Brussels must tell them you are free to tear yourselves apart.
Thank you so much for these concluding comments. Dalia Grybauskaite, what would be your concluding comment?
Yes, I want to say that what we're discussing is the strategic thinking, what Europe needs, and it is objective goal. But anti-immigration narrative will not go anywhere soon. It is clear that it is only increasing in its place in Europe, and there is a lot of objective reasons for it and subjective reasons for it. Because of even weaponization of migration, it makes a lot of anti-immigration sentiments in our societies. Politics is using this very much inside for its nationalism in our political lives. So yes, we do have academical understanding, scientific understanding that we need migration for our economic security and demographic security in future, but the way will be painful, sensitive, and long for that goal.
Thank you so much to both of you. Jas Merit, Dalia Grybauskaite, thank you for joining and presenting your thoughts. Congratulations once more to the book. And I would also like to thank the audience for the very active participation in the discussion. I should close the program by quoting Antonio Vitorino from the back of the book, who is, by the way, another former EU commissioner. He says, we urgently need a rational debate on migration based on robust evidence, which does not avoid complex and thorny issues. I think we demonstrated this today. It has been indeed a rational debate, and we did not refrain from the thorny issues by recognizing that this issue indeed is complex and requires a lot of analysis, discussion, but also responsible policy making at the level of the European Union. Thank you very much, and see you next time with the Friends of Europe.